Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the Exponential Potential. And we are joined today by Dr. Steve Yacovelli, who, as you can see, if you're watching, can't see it if you're on audio, is the gay leadership dude. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Hello, Claire. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, this month we are focusing in on big, bold you, which is more terrifying depending on which word you accentuate, really. Is like, I don't know if the you is more scary or the big or the bold is like, each of them are. Um, and we are focusing on how you can bring all of yourself unashamedly to the table in order to truly be your life force and what you're meant to do.
Love it.
That get you going? Yeah,
It gets me going. It's so in line with the work that we do at Topdog Learning Group. And as the gay leadership dude, I kind of like being big and bold and putting it out there.
So, Steve, you're the owner and principal of Topdog Learning Group. We've already established that we both adore dogs and puppies.
Yes.
We won't put those up. But Topdog is all about learning and development, leadership, change management, diversity and inclusion. But you've had some amazing clients. You've worked with Disney, Bill and Melinda Gates, American Library Association. There's some really impressive names, and kudos
Thank
to
you.
you for disrupting them.
It's been fun, and that's one of the interesting things about being a LGBT owned business here in the States is I'm a minority owned business, and so a lot of these organizations are really striving to increase their diversity spend, as they call it. And so I'm not competing with like the Accentures of the world on projects, but that can be an awesome differentiator just by me being who I am and being out loud and bold, saying, "Hey, gay leadership dude, Top Dog Learning Group, queer owned business. Yeah, Steve, we want to work with you," says, Bayer Pharmaceutical or whoever.
Spot on. Um, so you, I mean, you bring 25, 30-ish years
Almost 30, almost 30.
years of experience in leadership and strategy, learning and communication. So, you really do know your onions. But actually, what I like about you is that you bring through that theory as well as the really practical bits that are going to achieve results. Very often people get stuck in the theory, don't know how to implement, or they kind of are living up to somebody else's expectations and rules.
Yeah, it's one thing. I mean, I'm an academic. I'm a nerd, Dr. Yacovelli, blah blah blah. But I remember, for like a hot minute, I was a university professor. It was right after I got my doctorate, and I was in the College of Education at the University of Central Florida here in Orlando, Florida, where I live. And I remember sitting around the faculty meeting, and I made a comment saying that students really are consumers. Dot dot dot. And many of the faculty turned on me and were like, they are not buying their degrees. I'm like, the heck they aren't. They're consumers, especially, and this is well before distance learning was even more of a thing than it is, which happens to be my doctorate is in instructional technology and distance education. So I was Zooming before Zoom was a thing. And I remember my dean at the time, who was very forward thinking. She's like, we're having a one-on-one, and she's like, "I love how you are looking at education differently than the kindergarten through 12th grade here in the States kind of mentality." And I'm like, yeah, I mean, if we're doing it right, education shouldn't stop. And that's why I like the corporate learning space. But it's learning is awesome. I love it, of course, but it's the application, and that's why I think of myself more as a practitioner than an academic if I have to weigh each one.
Mm. So, how on earth did you get to this point? In kind of radio professor, kind of working with Disney. How did you get to this point in your career?
So I've always been in some sort of leadership communication role. I did work for Disney a couple times. At one point, I was an internal leadership consultant with Disney Cruise Line, which gotta say that was a sweet gig. That talk about awesome business travel, where I'd go on a cruise ship every couple weeks and teach some leadership classes to the crew and hang out on the private island, and then go back to my home office and do it all again. But I found myself going to just different and interesting opportunities, also while studying and trying to make myself, an even better human. And it turned out that while I was at Disney, this is in the early '00s, so it's that long ago, is when I met one of my best friends and at the time mentor, still a mentor. And she's like, we were on one of the ships. I was actually training to take over her job because she was going on to something else. And she's like, we should start a business. I'm like, what? I'm like, we have jobs. She's like, no, no, we're like the perfect chief learning officer together. I'm like, And she's originally from the UK. She was kind of like, we met midway on the her corporate ladder. She ended up retiring from Disney at like a super senior HR role. So because she kept going up, but we went to our HR manager, our HR executive at the time, and we said, hey, this is what we want to do. She's like, thank you for being honest. Don't use Disney stuff. Don't use Disney time. Have at it, friends. And we're like, woo. So we went and we had this part-time side hustle, and we didn't do a whole lot, but we meet once a week, drink some wine, and like plan training events, and we had a couple clients here and there. Flash forward to late 2007, and I was working. I won't say the name, but if you troll me on LinkedIn, you can figure it out pretty easily. But I was working as the global head of leadership for a Fortune 500 company who did a lot of direct selling, and they were a big deal. And I was there for a year and a half. There was this big HR luncheon a couple weeks prior to this day that I'm thinking of. I got this nice little shiny glass award, which is literally sitting on my desk as we speak. HR Executive of the Year, woo! So I get called in and like, Steve, this isn't working out. We're letting you go. I'm like, wait, what? That's like a 90-day conversation, not like you just gave me a little glass award for being an HR Executive of the Year thing. And uh, laws being what they are, Florida is what's called a right to work state. So as long as I'm not being terminated for a quote unquote protected class, which is usually race, ethnicity, now, and sexual orientation wasn't part of that at the time, although my boss was gay, so that kind of ruled that out. I still to this day have no idea. But it was such a blessing in disguise because it's what kind of made me start Topdog as my full-time hustle, starting in January 2008, which in hindsight, that was a really stupid time to start a business as your full-time gig, but it worked. And, flash forward, knock on wood, here I am ever since, being the head dog of a pack of really awesome consultants.
Ah, cool. Well, I mean, starting in 2008, what you don't know about resilience.
Right. I actually, that's why we teach one of those classes on resiliency for that exact reason.
Dear. So with this topic, kind of, we are focusing on the big bold you and showing up with authenticity, but that's being honest about your successes and your failures. So what have you learned in this time?
I absolutely love failure. I mean, I don't want to do it all the time, of course, let's be real. But, that's one of the things that I have been very fortunate to have, that, talk about resilience and shifting that attitude, is there's always a learning lesson when you fail. And in the resilience classes that we teach, it's actually one of the talking points is proactive experimentation. And, if you experiment, but you always win, you're not doing it right. You need to fail at some point, and then the idea is, okay, what did we learn from that failure? Fantastic, that's a data point. Let's adjust and move on and go. And I've kind of given that philosophy ever since. I mean, as many folks listening, as you well know, Claire, when you have your own business, it's always a hustle. Until you get that massive traction, the cash flow is going where it needs to go, you are always in startup mode, and you are always going to be in that failure mode. Every proposal I send out, I know I'm like, it might go, it might not, and you just keep trying. And I think having that attitude toward, that positive view of the world, that, well, I learned something, or hey, they may not have hired us this time, but now they know our name, they see our prices, they're exposed to our brand. Yeah, who knows what next time holds. And I think that's been one of the successful things about actually my business is we don't get mad when someone says no. We're like, okay, maybe next time, see ya. And then a lot of times folks will come back when the timing is better, and
Yeah.
then we go from there.
So do you bottle that up as a philosophy when you're teaching leadership? Do you encourage people that come along to learn about failing? Don't be
It's
scared.
about failing and being kind. I think are the two big tenets in all of the leadership stuff. So basically, our three main program areas are we do like kind of generic leadership 101, and we have a handful of clients where we teach folks. Now we do it all online, which is even more fun. But we teach folks, kind of the basics on being a more effective leader. We have a bunch of standard programs we do. Then we do inclusive leadership programming, where being effective leaders, but through the concept of belonging and how you cultivate that sense of team with the diverse group that you hopefully have. And then we do queer leadership, which is focused on leadership for the LGBTQ plus and also ally, but mainly queer leadership folks. So those are kind of the three things. And the running thread through all three areas is you're going to mess up, and that's okay. You're human. Going through my little bubble's going there if you're watching. You're going to have roadblocks and stumble when you have relationships with people, but always work through kindness and positivity, and you won't fail.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, that works at every single level. And I think that when you're in an organization, you look up at the bosses and you go, well, they're not kind. And like, well, actually, when you get the time to explore that, they are kind in the relationships that they have with people around them, kind across organizations, and curious, and just ready to bounce.
I
Mm.
I love being at this stage of my career because a lot of my peers who I kind of you cut our teeth with are now the senior executives of the C-suite, and so I remember when we got drunk and blah blah blah. Like they're human, and not to disparage or anything, but like everybody started somewhere. And so and I think always having that philosophy that my mom, and she was amazing, or she is an amazing person, but she was an amazing secretary at an elementary school most of her career. And she always told me to never underestimate the power of the admin. And I always took that in two different ways. One, that, power sits in various levels within an organization, not just where it is on the org chart. So that was the big takeaway. My mom totally ran that school because she was the main secretary, and you didn't mess with Joycey. But two, it also helped me realize that you should be building relationships with everyone because everyone's a human. And whether they're in the C-suite, they're sitting at the front desk, they're mopping up whatever, everyone's a human. And if you're a smart strategic leader, you're going to build those relationships, because one, just makes the world better and makes the job more fun, but two, that can be a strategic advantage from a leadership perspective. You just never know where that seed is going to germinate.
Yeah, and you never know when you might need to pull on it, right?
Yeah.
There's so much going on in the world. Kind of, you need to be able to fall back on the people around you. You need to know that they're not going to run for the hills whenever there's any problems. That they are going to be honest with you if there are problems within your organization. Yeah. So from the work that you've done, what do you think stops people feeling safe enough to be kind and safe enough to kind of be them?
Yeah, it's a great question, Clara, and I kind of think of it through, these are the six. If you're watching, you're seeing six things, and I'll describe them in a moment. But being in this leadership space for the almost 30-ish years, you see a pattern of behavior. You see what's working for folks and what's not, and what's leading to success or what's leading to failure. And I for my last book, I really focused on, well, what are the top six leadership competencies, and they, in my experience, they are authenticity or being authentic, having courage, leveraging empathy, effective communication, building relationships, and shaping culture. And I think these are the ones that either make or break people's workplace culture on being kind or being inclusive. Empathy is the first thing that pops out to me. Is if I'm in a workplace that's not leading with empathy, whether that be for the team members, for my customers, for my vendors, for whomever, and the challenges that they face, you're not going to win hearts and minds. It takes courage, which was the second one I talked about. If I'm a leader in that meeting and someone says that disparaging comment, do I have the courage to step up and say something? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it's one of the things we teach quite a lot, especially in our inclusive leadership programming, because people will say, "Oh, I want to be inclusive. I want to create that sense of belonging for everyone, that kindness," but then that senior executive in that meeting says, and this is part of a true story, well, women drive, and no one says something, no one has the courage to step up, then what do we just do to our workplace culture? Oh, if I'm a female in the room, one of the colleagues, I'm like, wow, that was pretty painful. Nice job. Thanks for having bias against you, well, women. And what do any of us others in the room also think? Like, oh wow, that was pretty gross. And so we need to have the courage to say to that senior executive, hey, what did you mean by that statement, Bob, or whomever it is? So I think these 6 competencies can really help shape the workplace culture for the better, or the lack of them can really erode that kindness of that culture.
Mm. And I love that you've got courage so high there, because it does take it does take courage for a lot of people that I work with directly, and a lot of listeners today kind of, they're holding something back from work. They're holding something back from their personality, whether it's small, whether it's as big as their identity, or their, kind of who they really are, because they're concerned about what other people think, or they
Yep.
just don't feel safe to do it.
Yeah, and I look at the statistics here in the states where about 50% of LGBTQ, I say plu, but plus folks are actually out at work still. It's 2023, 24, whenever you're listening to this, and that's still pervasive. Why? Because people don't have the courage to be their authentic self, because the culture might ding me. I see this all the time on social media for myself. Literally this morning, so truth be told, my latest book. The current book that came out just 2 years ago, Pride Leadership Strategies for the LGBTQ plus leader to be the king or queen of their jungle, was banned in Congress here in the States. Yeah, in one congressional committee, I was really upset at first, but my husband was really awesome. He's like, "That's awesome." I'm like, "No,
Very good
that's like
PR.
I'm like a footnote in a congressional thing for appropriations committee in this one thing." And he's like, and the fact that they actually listed my book title, like saying you cannot spend federal funds on this book, at least in this one department, and like I'm trolled all the time on social media because I'm like, hey, my book was banned in certain circles of this world, and people are just like, the trolls are out there just being negative. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to leverage that courage thing that I preach, because to heck with it. Here's my book. If you don't like it, don't go read it. And
Yeah.
so I think, go
If you
ahead.
want to burn it, just make sure you buy a lot of copies first.
100%. Yes, exactly. And I think that's that attitude. And then we're getting back to that positive view of the world kind of resiliency attitude thing again, is what I'm lovingly see in this day and age is because of the pandemic and all glass half full, little silver lining thing, the way we work now is very different. And I tell a lot of the people I coach, if you're not happy to be your authentic self in the workplace, are you an indentured servant to that business? They're like, no, of course not. I said, you can work remotely depending on your job. You might be able to pick up your toys and not move, but virtually go elsewhere. And companies are starting to really figure that out, at least smart companies, that, ooh, if I want to retain the best talent, yeah, I better allow that authenticity to be part of my workplace culture. And you are seeing that shift in acceptance of who people are regardless, and say, great, but can you do the work? And I'm kind of excited to see that.
Yeah. So if you're somebody who is a leader, then how can you bring your own authenticity to open up space for others to feel safe enough, and to bring themselves?
Yeah, people know when you're phoning it in. And, when you're fake, when you're just like not really being authentic, and that's why authenticity is the first one on the list. And now, truth be told, out of these 6, again, I'll read those for those who aren't watching. Authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. They are so gorgeously intertwined. We have actually a online leadership program that uses these 6 as the foundation. And every time we have a conversation, I'm like, remember, friends, we're not just talking about this one competency. So, if I'm going to be authentic, it's courageous to be authentic. If I'm going to effectively communicate, then I have to have empathy from the point of the listener who I'm communicating with. But I'm also building relationships while I'm also communicating. And all of that's helping to shape culture. And so they're so gorgeously intertwined. And that's why I think these are the top 6 competencies anyone, gay or straight or anything in between, really should be thinking about. Because it's really when we start to look at ourselves and our own behavior as a leader and say, you know what, how empathetic am I really being? how am I building the relationships with those around me? What am I doing to shape the culture through being my authentic self? And what does that say that really makes a difference within our workplace?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And and coming back to authenticity is just it's surprising it's surprising how much energy it takes not to be authentic. And
100%.
and we link back to resilience because that's a very strong theme around our conversation today. And also the big bold you is the bigger you grow, the kind of more authentic you are, the less energy you have to put into masking or hiding or keeping up with what you've told different people, or keeping up with the Jonesies, or even just daft bits like straightening your hair all the time. If you're really curly haired, the amount of energy it takes to straighten your hair to fit in is just
Yes.
exhausting. But actually, when you let go of that,
I,
wow.
I, I just came up with the Gay Leadership Dude as my personal title. Actually, when Pride Leadership came out, only because my publisher gave me a recommendation. She's like, "Steve, what's your brand?" I'm like, "Well, it's Top Dog Learning Group." She's like, "No, no, no, that's your business. But what's your personal brand?" I'm like, "I don't know." So I really noodled on that for quite a while, and then I came up with the Gay Leadership Dude. Trademark R for those in the States. You can't steal that. I think elsewhere you might be able to. But what I love about it is, reflecting before I created that title, I always had to make the mindful choice: do I or do I not come out in the space of new people I just met? And I used to do a lot more stand up training. I had to make that decision. Well, now I'm like, hey, Dr. Steve Yacovelli, pronouns he, him, and his. I'm the owner principal of Top Dog Learning Group. I'm also known as the Gay Leadership Dude. And right there, they know three things about me: that I'm gay, that I self identify as a dude, and I really like to talk about leadership so much it's in my title. And so it's like the heavy lifting is done. But when you have a hidden factor of your diversity, and that could be I'm neurodiverse, I have differing abilities, whatever that looks like, you have to make that conscious decision to be your authentic self, be bold, share that with others, or not. If you don't feel safe, don't. I'm all about being authentic. I mean, that's how I roll. But if you don't feel safe to be authentic, and I say this as a white cisgender gay dude in the United States, but I live in Florida, so there's that. But if you don't feel comfortable and safe to do that, yeah, then you're not going to disclose that. Getting back to your question a few moments ago, Claire, about how does a leader if you create that space where people can feel safe, where they can feel comfortable saying, hey, you know what, I'm neurodiverse, hey, you know what, I have this differing ability that might impact my work, I'm a trans person, I'm queer, whatever. If you create that space where people can disclose that, you're doing great.
Definitely, definitely. And then also, what I what I like around this theme again, we're resilient. It's a big bold you, but your decision to launch your business in 2008, looking back, that's a really tough time, and you must have had to draw on every ounce of courage to keep seeing it through, to keep putting those proposals in, keep taking the rejections. But actually, you seem to have grown so much by pulling all of that out, taking those steps.
Yeah, I'm such a massive believer in, you put good in the world, it will come back. And whether you believe in a God, universe, Buddha, Allah, bigger meaning, or just the universe, or whatever, it doesn't matter. I think positivity breeds positivity. And, it's hard. I mean, some days it's super hard. I'm working on my next year's strategy, and one of our biggest clients is like, "We're going to take a pause." I'm like, "Oh, that's a really big hit to my bottom line." So what do we do? I'm like, "Okay," and I got my team together. I'm like, what's our game plan? What do you think? And they're like, well, we should do different reach out and network. I'm like, absolutely. So let's go. And I think just, not sitting there and wallowing in, oh, woe was me, this happened to me, womp womp, being like, okay, well, that sucked, but what can we do? Then I think that's how we make change and keep moving forward and keep growing.
Yeah, and in terms of the overall podcast, we kind of have this mantra around thriving through times of great change, and boy, are we going through great change right now. I mean, that's an excellent example of what you can do to be more resilient. Have you got any other goodies you want to share?
And I pulled this from and this wasn't planned. So if you're watching, I happen to have a slide, of course, because I'm that kind of a nerd. But when we teach our resiliency classes, we actually focus on the top three things that you can do, and we kind of talked about these already. But the first one is just that positive perspective, that glass half full, and that, like I said, sometimes it's like, well, that sucked, but what's the good that came out of it? What did we learn from that? Well, let me tweak my proposals now and make them a bit more attractive, or maybe my pricing is off, or whatever that looks like. The second concept we teach is having a healthy self concept, and what we mean by that is you can use words like self esteem might be a different one you're more familiar with. And the biggest thing that we say is reflect on your life. And Claire, you brought it up beautifully already. I can say when I'm in my lowest, well, you know what, Stephen, you started a business full time in 2002. You led a in-person training company in early 2020, still survived and actually exponentially grew the following couple years. And so it's really reflecting on, at this point in our lives, and I'm saying this to everybody who's listening or watching, you've gone through adversity somewhere, but you're still here. So what did you do to get you from that low point to that high point, and then rinse and repeat? So that's kind of the second thing. And then the other is probably the hardest one, but it's the one that really hits at the root of change for folks because of that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're hitting that safety zone, and it's being comfortable with uncertainty. Life's a big bowl of question marks, and so how comfortable we are with those question marks and what we can control versus not control will really help us understand. And we do an experiment or an activity in these classes where we have people think about a big hairy deal that they're dealing with, and then we say, okay, with that big thing, where are you focusing your energy? Is it where you can have control, where you can't have control, but you can at least influence some outcome? Or is it in the kind of outer ring, it looks like a bullseye, it's in you can't control nor can you influence? And 9 times out of 10, people who are lower in resiliency are focusing their energy on that ring that will yield nothing. So where's the energy flow going? You're throwing it out. So channel that energy to the stuff you can either directly influence, or you can actually control specifically, and that's the way to kind of help yourself through those times of change.
And there's so much read across into everyday life, not just in terms of work life. It's like, oh god.
Absolutely.
And I've got sorry, it's going to sound like a total crush now, but I absolutely adore the concept of self concept. And it's a repeat, but that's one of the joys for me as working as a coach, and for many other people, is that we can see how freaking brilliant people are. It's just like, get out of your way.
Yes.
Come
Yes.
on.
I listened to one of your episodes on self-sabotage, and that so resonated with me because it's so true. People who have a lower self-concept or self-esteem will stumble and get in their own way. It's like, no, no, friend, you've done this before. Like, look at that perspective. And sometimes it does take that external person to help us see it a little bit differently.
So, so going back, tell me a little. You mentioned that your book, Pride Leadership, was launched 2 years ago. What was behind launching the book for you?
So when I've been noodling around. I've done some writing in the past. Technically, Pride Leadership was my third book. Yeah, I mean, one was a dissertation, which I just got the ISBN credit, and yay! And I'll get like a 2 cent residual once in a blue moon. I'm like, Mom, did you buy my book again? So, but there's that. And then I tried to do some self-publishing, and so my self-published book was called Overcoming Poopy E-Learning. And so, and thank you for laughing, Claire. That's exactly. It was kind of like I just wrote it because I was so tired of academic writing,
Yeah.
but I still wanted to teach and talk about my doctorate in distance learning and distance education. So it was a complete other flop. It was a horrible experience. I know some people have fantastic experiences self-publishing. I did not, and so I just kind of put it on the virtual shelf, blah. But I'm like, there was always a book in my head, and then I happened to be at a conference in 2018, and I'm outside of a session, and I'm kind of sorting my business cards, and this woman's doing the exact same thing next to me, and she's like, "What do you do?" Like, consulting, blah blah blah. How about you? She's like, "I am a publisher." I said, there's a book in my head. I know that. She's like, "Let's get that book out," and that's how I started working with Jen T. Grace at Publisher Purpose Press, which is my lovely publisher. I get no kickback for sharing that, but so that's how we started the book, and I actually started writing it as a generic leadership 101 kind of book, what I've seen in my 25 plus years experience at that point. And then I started looking around fellow queer leaders who are doing a lot of advocacy work, both here in Central Florida as well as nationally and beyond. And Claire, do you remember the Sex in the City TV show years ago?
Yes,
Okay,
of
so
course I do.
yes, figured so Carrie would sit down. For those who don't know, it's this 30-minute sitcom-ish kind of thing, and the main protagonist would sit down at her little MacBook, and somewhere in the beginning of the episode, I couldn't help but wonder, and that was always the theme for the episode, and she'd focus on a topic. Well, that's what kind of happened. I said, I couldn't help but wonder, with these 6 leadership competencies, is there something different to experience if you are a queer person? So authenticity, for example, as we already talked about, Brene Brown's of the world and all sorts of smart folks are saying, if you're authentic, you're a better leader. Yes. So now how does that play out through the rainbow lens of I'm an out gay man in the office, I'm a trans person being my authentic self? That's power. And so what I talk about in the book is how do you, you're already doing it, queer leader, how do you channel that to be more effective? And that's kind of how Pride Leadership came about to be. And it came out, haha, pun intended, in June of 2019.
Ah, dear. And yeah, kind of as a foundation book, that's for any audience.
Yeah.
In terms of the content there, as well as for the LGBTQ plus, and for allies,
Allies, yeah.
for sure. So
I we build we use this as a textbook for one of our training programs, and we have a lot of allies go through it as well. And usually it's tied to employee resource groups, and but they'll have allies in there, and lots of allies are like you just need. And I actually heard this several times. You should just de-gay the book, and I'm like, no, that'd be unauthentic. Hello, one of the chapters. But I hear what you're saying. But my editor said this is the book she wanted during her MBA program when they were talking about leadership, because she's like, and it's also cheeky dad jokes. I'm like, yeah, of course it is. But it's I mean, my publisher laughed at my bibliography when I wrote this. She's like, oh my gosh, this is a textbook. I'm like, these are just things I've seen that like smarter people have created some models that I use. I need to acknowledge that, but I want to share those with the readers, and it's worked out really well. We create a workbook that goes with the book, and like I said, online classes, and it's been such a fun journey.
but it feels like even in those last couple of years, the world has changed so much, and so many more people are confident to be who they want to be and to feel safe enough to share their own, their diversity or their orientation. What have you noticed big enough shifts, and where's the world go next?
So here's the Steve glass half full thing again. No, I think there's a big backlash. You're seeing that here in the United States. You're seeing it other places. You're seeing it here, specifically like my state of Florida, where people are really pushing back, especially toward my trans brothers and sisters and siblings, and that's, to me, that's scary, and it's horrible, and I'm trying to do what little I can to step up and defend. But I also know that reaction is coming out of panic, because there are so many more people in the world like us who are like, you know what, live and let live, be your authentic self, and that's amazing. And yeah, there's a vocal minority that are saying no, and we're going to make rules, and we're going to take this away from you. But there's so much more backlash against that kind of backlash behavior that's like, okay, that gives me hope. So I don't think we're there yet, but I think as we galvanize the quote unquote other forces, that's where the change is going to happen. I actually attended a rally here in Orlando about 6 months ago or so, and who was represented at that rally? It was you had the LGBTQ community, you had people there promoting women's rights, you had people supporting minority workers and migrant workers and that kind of movement, and all sorts of other folks there. And I'm like, yes, this is how change is going to stick. So again, I don't think we're there, but we're getting there.
Yeah. So tell me about the next chapter, the next
Quite literally the
edition.
next chapter. So as your queer career kind of came out, and it's educating people kind of on leadership theory and strategy and such, I was getting a lot of questions from people, either I'm coaching or in my leadership classes, and they would ask questions very specific to their situation, like, hey Steve, I'm in an employee resource group and it just doesn't seem to be working. What should we do? And so I kind of started assembling these questions, and kind of, I kind of did it like the Dear Abby version, but with the gay leadership dude. Dear gay leadership dude, I think my boss is homophobic. What should I do? And in 1,200 words or less, I kind of share, here's what I would do with that. And a lot of times the strategies were pulled right from Pride Leadership to say like, oh, well, in that chapter on effective communication, we talk about these 6 ways to have that hard conversation. We'll use that with your boss who thinks, who you think is homophobic, and these strategies. And so that's kind of the next book that's coming out, Your Queer Career, Workplace Advice from the Gay Leadership Dude. And again, same idea. It's through the rainbow lens, but there's applicability to a lot of the questions in there. How do I effectively have those tough conversations? What can I do if I don't feel like I'm getting promoted like I should, et cetera, et cetera. So Your Queer Career, coming to a virtual or physical bookshelf near you.
And it just sounds like it's full of practical goodies, practical support, because we need a little bit of a helping hand in order to step forward, really. Yeah.
And sometimes it just takes, again, that's why coaches like us exist, just looking at things from that different perspective, that diverse perspective, and not to say, go do this, but have you thought about doing this? And having that kind of coaching mentality. This is one of my favorite graphics I found. I still can't find who it is. If you're looking at the screen, it's the way that I tell people, here's what true coaching is. And it's a grid. If you picture a grid, and on one, the horizontal continuum, it's the focus is on the problem all the way to focus on the solution. And then the horizontal is your job as the human, as the leader, is to either ask more questions or do more telling. And so if you do the intersection of focusing on the problem, but you're asking, that's technically therapy. If you've ever been to any sort of therapist, they're asking you lots of questions, but it's focused on solving a problem that you have. Counseling is still focused on the problem, but the counselor is going to tell you what to do. And if you've ever gone to a career counselor, they tell you what to do. You need to do this, write your resume, go to Indeed.com. They give you those task lists. On staying in the more telling, but now focusing more on the solution, that's mentoring. So if you ever have a mentor, a lot of times, well, when I was in your shoes, I would do this and tell you this and that. But true coaching is where we talk about the solution, but we just ask questions. And yes, sometimes that kind of blurs into the mentoring. Hey, have you thought about doing this? Yeah, now you're in mentoring mode, but you're still focusing on the solution with the ultimate goal of the human you're talking with as the coach, your coachee, if you will, comes up with the solution or the action plan, and then they kind of take that and run with it. So I just always thought this was a cool way to think about it. And really, Your Queer Career is kind of the blend of mentoring and coaching, but always focusing on that solution area.
Yeah. And the timing of this launch is January, so there's so many people that start the new year with new intentions, like, right, okay, this year I'm going to achieve X. What tips would you give for people that want to make a career shift, or want to accelerate their own career within their own organization, or even branch out to self-employment, kind of
I think it's 3 things that come to mind. The first is you're not going to change your career or learn a skill by doing it once, or just doing one strategy. It's the same thing about getting fit. And January, New Year's resolutions, I'm going to be healthier. So you go to the gym once and then that's it. No, that's not how it works. I eat a salad. Yay, I'm healthier. So developing your career is a strategy, and thinking about all the things that you need to do. Do you have a mentor? Or if you're at that level, are you a mentor? What am I doing for self-development and self-growth? Am I communicating my desires to the folks within my organization as well as beyond? So I think that's the first thing, is to think of that strategy. The second is really looking at your network and your networking and ask, is it right? Am I surrounding myself with the people who I want to surround myself with to grow in my career? Am I reaching out? Am I using tools like a LinkedIn, like an Indeed, to kind of put the feelers out there and grow that network? Am I looking at local resources to grow my local network? So kind of thinking through building those relationships, if you will. And I think the last one too is really being okay with things not going as planned. So getting back to that proactive experimentation we talked about earlier, is I apply for a job, I don't hear anything, or I get rejected. Womp womp. Well, that's okay. And easier said than done, I know, but sometimes when we have these great goals, it may not go as planned. Sometimes that's for the better. I was fired, but then what happened? I started my business full time. And so, being mindful that those setbacks might be good things, and what can you learn from them as you progress in your career?
There's always a gift.
Yeah.
Even if it's a gift of it's not this time, it's
Yeah.
another time, or if it's another employer, or it's another lover, or yeah, anything like that. There's
Yes.
always something behind it, for sure, for sure. Ah, Steve. It's just awesome. And audience, I have to say, as well as definitely buying book. And if you don't like the book, buy 100 of them and burn them. It's fine. Yeah, as you can see. Um, but there's some really pragmatic strategies there. Similarly, in terms of the history of exponential potential, we've had some great guests who've covered networking and LinkedIn. We start to look at alignment. If you need a little bit of a nudge in terms of where your real direction is, if you need a little bit of confidence,
Love it.
we've got resources there, guys. But none of that can change unless you open up, for sure, and have the courage and the kindness to yourself and others to be the big, bold you. Oh, Steve, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. And we've only touched the surface of the work that you do, but uh, you're a hugely impressive speaker and leader and advocate. And every now and again, you meet someone who yeah, they're changing the world. They're changing the world. I can see how this is coming.
Let's hope. Let's hope. I want to, as I said, to paraphrase Steve Jobs, I want to put a ding in the universe. So I'm ringing my bell. Hopefully, it's digging.
How can people follow your work and get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to head to our main website, topdoglearning.biz, B-I-Z. You can see my work, stuff about my team. We actually do a lot of free webinars and networking sessions and such. So the easiest thing is just to go to our main website, topdoglearning.biz.
Ah, fab, fab, fab. And because we're heading into 2024, what does big, bold Steve look like this year?
One of the things that I'm really throwing out in the universe is more keynote speaking. You kind of might figure I kind of enjoy it, but I think that's a way to really share my story, one to many, many, many versus one to many. We do a lot of social media posting. I try to add value through that channel, specifically for mainly on Instagram and LinkedIn. Launching the Your Career podcast around this time as well, with the kind of basically taking the book and making it audio, not just an audio book, but like bringing it to life, having those conversations, and just trying to make the world a bit more inclusive for all others, whatever that looks like.
Well, Enzo on my lap here is super excited. He's already
Yeah.
gone, oh,
Mm.
this sounds really
You
cool.
say dog? Dog? What? Dog?
I know. so, so plenty of resources. You have got every single opportunity at your fingertips and in your earbuds, guys. Grab it, grab this new year, grab this you, all of you. Doesn't even have to be a new you because you're freaking gorgeous. And just enjoy. And as always, it's been a pleasure serving you as co-host today of Exponential Potential. If you like what you've heard, like, subscribe, show us some love, give us your comments and feedback, share with a friend who needs a kick up the ass. Sorry, where does that fit on the triangle? Is that mentoring or coaching? I'm not sure.
It's called tough love. Tough love.
In the meantime, you take care of yourself and be big and bold. And you and Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you for creating this space, Claire. I appreciate it.
See you soon.